I always believe that this is the best club of the city when it comes to the spirit of the place. There can be no better club than this. Thank you so much once again. I dedicate this presentation to the memory of the late Mr. N. Shankar of Sanmar, without whom I would have never gotten down to researching the history of Chepauk the way I did particularly when the 175th year book was written. And Shankar was not well and we had COVID restrictions, but we would have a Zoom and at that time I think Google Meet chats practically every third day. And he would want to know what had been found, what I was putting in, then he would add a little bit of what he knew. And that is how I worked on that presentation. I remember there was an earlier presentation here on the heritage around us. And at that time, Shankar was here in the audience. He came and he participated in that as well. That was quite some time ago. But this is a story about how this was a palace and then how it became a stadium. And last month I did a heritage walk on this topic in Triplicane. And I was amazed when lots of people called me and said, where is this Chepauk Palace? And I was a little taken aback when I realized that it has been so successfully hidden from public view that nobody seems to know about it. And if at all anybody would be happy that it has been hidden from public view, it would be the British, because they hated the palace and they did all they could to make sure that it got hidden from public view, and we only carried forward that legacy. We are still carrying forward that legacy. So without further ado, we'll just start with 1707 when Aurangzeb died, and that was the extent of his empire, completely coming down all the way up to Tanjavur and further south. And after he had passed away, the empire split. And then you had the Nizam of Hyderabad, who had become more or less an independent ruler. The Nizam's assistant was the Nawab of Arcot. And Nizam was not very effective in managing his own dominions, so the Nawab of Arcot became an independent ruler. But all this was very short-lived because there was someone else who was up waiting for everything to come up for grabs. Those were the colonial powers. So there was the British and there was the French as well. Between the two of them, they were trying to find out how they could lay their hands on all this. They had come as traders, and gradually they had realized that the bigger money was in the empire and not in just trading. And falling practically into their hands were the battles of succession that the Nawabs of Arcot regularly fought. So the problem of polygamy, the problem of lack of the law of primogeniture, which is, the eldest son will automatically become the ruler, something that was very established in England and other places. That was not here. Here it was the survival of the fittest. You had to kill everybody and then you had to come to power. So, we always look on Dara Shikoh as the man who lost out to Aurangzeb. But God knows what he would have been had he come to power. He would have had to kill all his brothers as well. He would not have been left with a choice in the matter. It's just that he doesn't exist, so we don't know what would have been his legacy as a Mughal emperor. So we come to the battle between Muhammad Ali Wallaja and Chanda Sahib. Chanda Sahib was, Muhammad Ali was the grandson, Chanda Sahib was a son born of another wife, so to speak, and there were these battles. Chanda Sahib was supported by the French, Muhammad Ali was supported by the British, and eventually, thanks to a man whose middle name must have been treachery, Robert Clive, they managed to the British managed to get Muhammad Ali Wallaja to win. And then he was enshrined in Arcot. From there, the British managed to lay their hands on much of his kingdom. Not only did they manage to lay their hands on his kingdom, they managed to go north, and slowly they managed to reach all the way up to Bengal, because once they reached Bengal, they lost interest in Madras because they realized that the scope of earning, the scale and scope of earning in Bengal was several times what this dowdy old city offered. And so they completely forgot about us, and then they went on. Bengal became the capital. And when Clive was tried for corruption, he is supposed to have said, gentlemen, I was amazed at my own moderation. That was the level that was available. So, based on that, slowly they managed to conquer everything, going all the way up to Bengal. But here, at that time, in the 1750s, the Nawab of Arcot realized that he was not very comfortable living in Arcot as his capital. He wanted to move to Madras, to be in the shadow of the British, because once you have been taken care of, he was of the view that they would take care of him further, offer him further protection. And by that time, you had other forces coming in. You had the Marathas who were coming in, and after the Marathas would come Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. So that was a very troubled period in the history of the Deccan. And so the Nawab wanted to move down south. So he arrives in Madras city and he occupies a large camp in Mylapore in a place that is now known as Devadi Street. There is always history that is being revised. As you know, WhatsApp is one of the greatest sources of great history. And every day in the morning you receive a new version of what could have happened, what happened. Nobody bothers to verify anything. So now there is a story doing the rounds that Devadi Street is where all the Tevar Adiyal of Mylapore temple lived, which is why the Devadasis of the temple lived, which is why it is called Devadi Street. But its old name, right up to the early 1900s, was Diodi Sardar ul Mulk Dilawar Jang Bahadur. This was the name of the street. Diodi is the entrance or a gate. And this is where Sardar ul Mulk Dilawar Jang Bahadur had his camp. And even now there is a mosque in Devadi Street called the Char Chaman Masjid, which is a very tiny mosque. So who was Sardar ul Mulk Dilawar Jang Bahadur? That was the title given to the Nawab of Arcot, Muhammad Ali Walaja himself. So it's very clear that that is where he came and that is where he laid camp, very close to, I will call it Devadi Street because that will take 3 minutes otherwise to say it every time. But very close to Devadi Street, there is also a Dand Mariamman temple, Mandavali market. So Dand also means an army camp. So wherever you find an army camp came, you will find either a Dand Mariamman temple or you will find a Thulukanatha Amman temple. Thulukanatha Amman temple means a temple for the Devi installed by the Muslims for the prayer of the Hindu members of the army to prevent the occurrence of cholera, typhoid, cholera, plague and other such infectious diseases, because in 2 nights an entire army can be wiped out if there is an outbreak of one of these things. So Thulukanatha Amman and Dandamariamman you will find in several places in Chennai city itself. All of them can be traced back to the presence of an army camp over there at one time or the other. And so this was where the Nawab lived, and Nawab, being a gentleman, applied to the East India Company for permission to reside in what was his own property. So look at the, in Satyajit Ray's Shatranj ke Khiladi, Amitabh Bachchan will say, Company Bahadur ki Badappan dekhiye. That is, look at the generosity of the company. It was so kind that it gave permission. And where? It said, you come and live in the palace itself, in Fort St. George, because we will build a street for you called Palace Street inside the fort, and there you can build your palace and you can live with us in harmony. But his advisors were very clear. They told him that that is not a good idea. Remember, Chanda Sahib went and lived in Pondicherry and never came back after that. So it's not a good idea to go and live inside the fort. You ask for land outside. So the Nawab asked for land outside the fort. Don't forget, it was still his property. And the English gave him 117 acres in a place called Chepauk. Now, Chepauk these days is, again, WhatsApp history, is that Chepauk. Now, how do you then account for the fact that before the Nawab came also it was called Chepauk? Was he having gardens over there? Very unlikely. So just like Chidambaram, people keep insisting is Godabag because he was tethering his horses over there. Now, if he was tethering his horses over there, was he walking to Tiruvallikeni every day and going every day in the morning there to again pick up his horses? Then Nungabag or Nangabag, Nungambakam would have been his nudist colony. So, going by the same logic, nobody comes and gives us that story. So the point here is that Chepauk, Che is Arinjal tree, Arinjal shrub. It's a small shrub that grows in plenty wherever there's a sandy tract. And Chepauk would have been a very sandy tract because it's just next to the sea. And so this must have been the very old name, because you can't forget there are plenty of other localities in Chennai which are named after the shrub or the tree that is like Purushavakam, Perambur. There are lots of places with names that are associated with vegetation of those areas. So it's very likely that Chepauk, again not authoritative or proven that this was the reason for the name, but Pakam is a hamlet. And Che could have been the tree that grew over there. So the Nawab was given land, which is roughly what you see over here. Now going all the way up to Kannagi statue. And today this is Bells Road, where we are. So starting from this corner of Kannagi statue, coming down here, going all the way here, and then right up to the Kuam and the Buckingham Canal, and coming back right up to the front of the beach. So it was a rectangle of 117 acres that was given to the Nawab for building his palace. Now Nawab wanted a palace to be built by somebody who was a European. He was fascinated by Europeans, and he said, I want only Mr. Benfield to build the palace for me. Paul Benfield was with the Public Works Department of Fort St. George. He wrote contracts on tender in such a way that only he could bid for it. And then he would bid for the tender himself, and through a Benami he would then execute the project and make money both ways. So Nawab asked Benfield to build the palace, and Benfield came along and designed what is India's first British-built Indo-Saracenic building, which is the Chepauk Palace. And from then on, every building that the British would build in this country, going all the way up to New Delhi in 1931, would be a variant of the piece of architecture that Benfield built over here. So Chepauk Palace was built in 1768, and it was, Nawab moved in 1768. Having done that, in the process of building the palace, which took 2 years, Nawab had become a debtor of Benfield. You know how contracts are for building, right? All of us have built houses, so we know. The architects here will forgive me, and so will the civil contractors here. But the project kept ballooning, and Nawab needed money because he was not very good at collecting money from the villages that he owned. Benfield was loaning him money and collecting the money back at 25% interest. And when Benfield ran out of money, the British in Madras realized that this is a damn good business to get into. So let's all fund Benfield. So funding Benfield to fund the Nawab became a continuous, it was an early multi-level marketing scheme, a Ponzi scheme of its era. And the money was being given to the Nawab, and Nawab was building the palace. Now this kept going on, and they didn't end with just building the palace. Later on the Nawab needed money for maintaining his lifestyle and everything, and all continuously money was being pumped in via Benfield. Now in London there was a man called Edmund Burke, who was a member of Parliament. Burke wanted to get into the scheme. And at that time, Benfield said, this is only for locals. Ben Burke was offended, and he said, I will now blow the whistle on this whole thing. So in Parliament, the questions came up about the Nawab's debts, and then they raged on for a very long time. Eventually they would settle it to their own benefit, but let's not get up to there right now. Now this is the map. This is a Chepauk compound in 1861. At that time, MCC had not moved in over here. And it's a reasonable idea of how Chepauk grounds were at that point of time. These were the three buildings of the Chepauk Palace, which you see over here. You see a lot of ponds. Now this is roughly where MCC is today. This was where the barracks were, the soldiers' barracks for the Nawab, and later for the British Army. You find a series of ponds. A lot of it was empty space. A very curious thing about Chepauk Palace is you would expect that sea is on the eastern side and the palace would face the east. But remember, this was a Muslim nobleman's palace. So he had to face Mecca. So the palace is west. So it was presenting its rear to the sea. And there was a high compound wall over there. So there are no, practically except for two accounts, there are no accounts of how the palace was during the Nawab's time. Nobody has any idea. It was completely shut off. All we know is that there were two wings to the palace. One was called the Khalas Mahal because of the dome that is on top, and this was the Darbar Hall. And the other wing was known as the Humayun Mahal, which is where the Nawab's harem was. The Begums were living here, and this is private quarters of the Nawab. At a corner of, this is at the corner of Valaja Road now, Humayun Mahal. And if you go there, you'll find that towards the extreme left of this building, you'll find 3 domes and a couple of minarets facing west. That is because that was the Nawab's private mosque. So these are the 3 buildings that we know something about. We know that Khalas Mahal was Darbar Hall, Humayun Mahal was the harem, and there was a mosque also in Humayun Mahal. Beyond that, we have no idea. This was called the Nawab's bathing pavilion, Hasht Bangala. And do you know where it stands, where it was? It stands where the university buildings are today. So water from the Kuvam was pumped into this building using a mechanical wheel with a couple of camels going round and round and round, and the water would be raised from the Kuvam and then brought into this building. And there was an octagonal, the whole building was octagonal, so it was known as Hasht Bangla. Hasht in Persian means 8. So it was the octagonal bungalow, and this was the Nawab's bathing pavilion. Other than this, this was the Nawab's bathing pavilion again during British times, all painted in white. You can see the University Senate House is there next to it. So this is a photograph post 1867. And you can see this building. Now this building doesn't exist anymore. Now the few accounts that we have of the Nawab's building is when successive Nawabs were crowned. So our old Muhammad Ali Walaja died in 1795, and then his son Umdatul Umra becomes the Nawab. And during the time of coronation, there were people who were able to go. They have given us a brief description of how the Darbar Hall looked. There are a couple of paintings in the Madras Club, aquatints, which you can see, of huge arched halls. Surprisingly, when you go there today, none of those halls exist. We have no idea whether that was an artist's impression or whether there was a building of that kind that was demolished later. You can see those 2 huge arches over there. There are no such arches anywhere inside Chepauk Palace today. And then Lady Elizabeth Gwilym, who was the first woman ornithologist of the world. Her husband was a judge of the Supreme Court of Madras in late 1795 till 1805 or so. She has gone and visited the place, and she's given a little bit of a description of how the women's quarters were at that time, but nothing really that gives you a great idea. Now this is Nawab very completely holding on to the hands of one of the British governors over here, very much living in his palace. Now Nawab dies in 1795. When he dies in 1795, his son Umdatul Umra becomes the new Nawab. He is in power till 1801. When I say power, he is independent Nawab till 1801. Now in 1801, when he dies, there is a problem because his successor refuses to treaty with the British, so they identify a cousin. There is always a cousin who's willing. And so they depose the real son and they put the cousin on the throne and sign up with him so that in settlement of all of the Nawab's dues, the whole of the Carnatic will pass into the British Empire, and a pension will be given to the Nawabs from then on, and they can continue living in Chepauk Palace. In 1805, when that Nawab dies, they say that the Nawab's family has been in treasonable correspondence with Napoleon, and earlier with Tipu Sultan, and finally they evict the Nawab's family from Chepauk Palace. In 1855, they bring the palace to auction. Now, who is going to bid for this palace? So the government bids for the palace and acquires it, and then it becomes government property, which still is. In 1860s, you had a governor called Napier, and Napier decides that Chepauk Palace cannot be visible because everybody who is coming in by ship, the first thing they see is Chepauk Palace. They think Fort St. George is nothing in comparison to this building, because from the sea you can see beyond the high walls and you see this brilliant red building with a dome on top, and everybody wants to know what it is. So he decides that the building has to be chopped up and blocked with multiple buildings piecemeal. And he has an architect with him, Robert Fellows Chisholm, who has come from Puri, because by the time in 1857 they have a university here. And a university needs a college and a Senate house. So there is a competition announced saying that you should, for the best design for a university senate house and a college, and the best design comes from one unknown PWD engineer in Bengal presidency, and that is Chisholm. Chisholm is a Scotsman who's come over there, and they are very impressed. The prize money is 3,000 rupees in 1857, a lot of money. And Chisholm then comes down to Madras, becomes the consulting architect for the government of Madras, and begins working on buildings over here. The first design that he will complete is Presidency College. And they all think that these designs are all his. He's copying them from buildings in England and other places whose drawings only he has. And in that era, cut and paste was not all that easy, and you couldn't go to Google and check where he was getting these designs from. And he was thought to be a great genius. Undoubtedly he was, there is no doubt about it. But the initial designs are what the present generation would call very sus. So the first one is to block the eastern face of Chepauk Palace. So what do? You build the PWD building over there. Now this is Scottish baronial. So when the people come from the sea, this is the building they'll be able to see. They will not be able to see the palace, which is behind it. Palace is completely hidden by this building. So this becomes the PWD. And then Chisholm builds a tower uniting the two wings of Chepauk Palace, the Khalas Mahal and the Humayun Mahal. And this tower is so tall that nobody will bother with the rest of it. And they ask you, they'll say, Chisholm built it. This is what we have done in order to enhance the buildings of an Oriental potentate who had no idea about architecture, barbarians, and we came here as civilizing influence, etc., etc. So this tower is then built to unify the two wings of Chepauk Palace, and that is even today the most visible element. You can even see it from our ground when you're walking or when you're playing or whatever it is. You can see the tower from here, between the slices of the stadium, you can see it. Now, what do you do with the main building itself? You give it to the engineering college. So this becomes the College of Engineering, which in 1931 will move to Guindy and become the College of Engineering, Guindy. So the College of Engineering has been around from the 1760s. So now it's given this particular building, and this is where students for a long time would study and pass out. So the palace itself would become the engineering college. On the front of it you would have the PWD, and the Khalas Mahal would become the revenue board offices. So all three have now been taken over. Presidency College comes up in what is known as the Nawabs Artillery Park. That is where guns gun practice for his army would happen. Now with the army being disbanded, Chisholm would build the Presidency College over there. Chisholm's Presidency College again is a hospital designed from Malta. Nobody knew about it at that time. So only now we discover that that building and this building look exactly like each other. So obviously he had brought away the blueprint and he was building here. Even today the Presidency College grounds have got 3 Muslim tombs inside them, indicating that they were part of the Nawab's property, where somebody, and they are considered to be peers. So somebody goes and places a green chadar on top of the 3 graves on a regular basis. Nobody has any idea what is this. Their names are there, but what is the significance? Were they related, or were they people whom the Nawab's family considered as advisors or saints or whatever? That we have no idea. But there are 3 graves inside the compound. Then in the late 1860s, Chisholm will embark on building the Senate House, which will come up on the Nawab's saluting battery. So every time he would leave the palace, 100 guns would boom out. So that was the saluting battery. And in that place would come up the University Senate House. So now you've blocked the eastern face in full. So you've got the PWD, you've got Presidency College, you've got Senate House, and then you've got the tower. So you've got everything over here. Then later in the 1920s, the Nawab's Bathing Pavilion, 1930s, the Nawab's Bathing Pavilion would be demolished and the university building would come up. At that time, Jackson and Barker, who were the architects, they decided that whatever they do, they should present a uniform facade. And so it is very much in the Chisholm style. And that really is what makes that stretch so beautiful, that you're able to see multiple buildings, all of the same look and feel. Behind, now what do? You've created the eastern face, now you focus on the western face. So behind Presidency College, The western end of the Nawabs Palace would become what is known as Victoria Hostel, the students' hostel for Presidency College itself, and also the hostel for the College of Engineering students, designed by Henry Irwin, who would design the second pavilion of the Madras Cricket Club, and also built by Tatikonda Namber Malchetti, the great contractor. So this building is in a very bad shape, but it is still there. You can see it. Victoria Hostel Road is the name of the road where it is. And this is where the principal of the College of Engineering lived. This building is still there. It was called the Lodge. It's on Victoria Hostel Road. And between the 1890s and 1913, the man who lived here was Henry Davison Love, who would write the best history of the city, 3 volumes called Vestiges of Old Madras, which were published in 1917. And with a 4th volume, which is the index to the first 3 volumes. Each volume is around 600 pages, and then you've got a 4th volume, which comes as a companion to give you an idea of what the history of the city was. Now, Love was the principal, and he was forever asking the government for more land from Chepauk Palace, because he wanted to build tennis courts, football fields, cricket grounds, etc., for the practice of the students. And that is where he would come into conflict with an organization known as the Madras Cricket Club. So the Madras Cricket Club in 1846 had been founded by Alexander Arbuthnot, who was in the civil services and would eventually in the 1860s become the chief secretary. So he founded it in 1846. Initially they were playing on the island. For 20 years they managed to play on the island and they were not bothered about land, but in the 1860s they decided that they needed a piece of land. And so they applied to the government. And just like Paul Benfield, who do you think is the person who's now giving permissions? The chief secretary, Alexander Arbuthnot, the founder of the Madras Cricket Club. So the letter goes to him, and then he is willing to consider parting with a small piece of land. But then for some time there are negotiations. And finally, in 1867 or 68, there is a man called John Pennyquick. How many of you remember Pennyquick? Mullai Periyar Dam, the construction. Pennyquick was then an engineer in the PWD, and he was the secretary of the Madras Cricket Club. He was just 25 at that time. But he had everything going for him. His father-in-law, Edward Maltby, had just then retired as acting governor of Madras, and his brother-in-law was the chief secretary. Shemia's Road is named after him, H.C. Shemia. And so when you have such connections, and you've got something that is not your property but is available to you to give for free, so immediately the government acted, and 13 counties, 10 grounds and 560 square feet was allotted to the Madras Cricket Club, with no agreement of any kind. That comes to roughly 18 acres. Nothing on paper to say that this is yours. You can play here. That's about it. The club didn't have any money. They could not put up a compound wall, nothing. They just continued playing cricket over there. But in the 1880s, Love had arrived, and Love was demanding that, you give us land, and that is when the club wakes up and decides that it must have a formal lease understanding with the government. But in the midst of all this, there is something called the Buckingham Canal that is now coming in. So the club, very happy over here, club is wanting to stay here, continue playing. Suddenly, the government decides, as a famine relief measure in 1875, that they are going to dig a canal, connecting the North Canal and the South Canal by digging across the city. And that's going to come right through the middle of the Madras Cricket Club. Then, it's not even their property, but they protest. We've been playing cricket here for so long, how is it that you can now displace us? So many people are dying in a famine, and this is work for food. The government has come up with a scheme whereby people will get money, food at the end of the day for digging a little bit of the canal. Club is not bothered with all that. Our cricket is getting affected. This is really not good. So they write a letter protesting that, we want to stay here, we can't get out. So the government says, get lost this very minute. Right, we are giving you alternate land on the island, go back and play over there till the work of the canal gets over. So the canal work gets over by the 1880s, and the club comes back with a very important change. So the old pitch was in this direction. That was the pitch, the cricket pitch. And there was a massive pond somewhere over here. And when they come back, they find that the canal coming in this direction has cut their access to the land on that side, which is why you have the new pitch in this particular alignment. So that is how the Madras Cricket Club's present alignment comes about, thanks to the Buckingham Canal. And today, it's very difficult to imagine that there was no canal. And therefore, this was one common property. Today, we take it so much for granted that there is a bridge, and then you come over it, and then the river on the other side, and so on and so forth. None of it existed. It's only post the 1890s that the canal arrived over here. Now, this is a very old photograph. You can see Chisholm's Tower right in the middle. You can see the Khalas Mahal. You can see the Humayun Mahal here barely sticking out. You can see the University Senate House over there. So the club moves back. Again, nobody bothers with a lease. So till 1926, there is really nothing on paper between the club and the government. Everything goes on fate. It must have been truly Ramarajya at that time. And then in 1826, there are two evil lawyers, King and Partridge. So beginning with the 1920s, beginning with 1915, King begins to move, saying that, we need to get some piece of paper which says that we have got a lease over here. And King dies in 1920, then Partridge takes over. Finally, in 1926, the lease is arrived at. And it is initially supposed to be for 20 years. They give it only for 10 years. And then they renew it in 1936. 1936, the rental, very, very expensive. 1,000 rupees per year for 18 acres, to be paid in 2 installments. And at the end of 10 years, it will go up to 2,000 rupees. Then after 10 years, it will go up to 2,500 rupees. So this was the princely sum that the club was paying for holding on to this piece of land, with some very unique clauses in the agreement. If coal or gold is found under the ground, it belongs to the government. So all these things were very clearly stipulated in the agreement. Now in the 1880s, when the government, when the club comes back, they finally build a boundary wall. And that boundary wall had a series of pillars going all around it in the best Indo-Saracenic style. There are 3 of them now surviving. 2 are at the entrance of the TNCA club. The 3rd one is at the intersection of Valaja Road and Bells Road. It's got the Dasavataram carved on it. You should go and see it. You shouldn't go late in the night because there are men relieving themselves over there. And after that, it's a good post to lean on if you've been to the Tasmac and imbibed rather happily. So you'll find people around. But during daylight, you can go there and you should take a look at it. This would have all gone when the new compound wall came up. Then some of us wrote a letter to Mr. N. Srinivasan requesting that the pillars be retained. They still survive, but with not much maintenance. We should do something about it to take care of them. Poor Nawab, in 1857, now, the old Nawabs have all gone. In 1855, even the pension that they were giving, they stopped because of the doctrine of lapse. They said, you don't have a clear heir, so even your pension goes. But in 1857, you had what was called the mutiny or the revolt or the first war of independence, whatever you may call it. And at the end of it, they felt that, they had not done the right thing by the Nawab. And so they said that we're not going to give you your kingdom, but we'll give you the title of Prince of Arcot, and we will give you a pension, and we'll give you a house. And what a house! It's the same model of building in which Queen Victoria lives in England. They never told him that this was one of her many houses. This was not Buckingham Palace. This is the Osborne House in the Isle of Wight. And good old Chisholm, always Chisholm is available for everything. So Chisholm is available to convert a police court in Roypeta into Amir Mahal. And that is the house in which the Nawab lives even today. It's strikingly similar to Queen Victoria's house, Osborne House in the Isle of Wight. And the Nawab is given the equivalent status by the government of a cabinet minister. The house is taken care of by the PWD. and he gets the pension. So 4 royal houses were recognized immediately after the First War of Independence. The Nawab of Oudh, the Raja of Tanjavur, the Nawab of Murshidabad, the Nawab of Arcot. Now, of that, only 2 royal families still survive. That is the Raja of Tanjavur and the Nawab of Arcot. And these are all certified by letters of patent like the High Courts. So even the Privy Purse Bill does not cover this. So the Nawab continues to get his pension and his status, and the house is maintained by the PWD. Chepauk Palace, this was the front end of, so every part of it had been blocked up, leaving the northern face and the northeastern face. So the northeastern face, which was at the corner of, in front of the University Senate House, if you stand, it was on the left, and from there you had this brilliant view of Chepauk Palace. Post-independence, we decided that this will not do. We must continue with what the British have. The legacy has to be continued. We are, after all, people who respect heritage. And our heritage is to block every heritage building in sight if we can't demolish it. So now this map is what eventually would become of Chepauk. So here you have the MCC. And sorry, this 26 is what you have as the MCC. And this is the Gosha Hospital. And then the rest of it. You've got Presidency College here. You've got the University Senate House building here, the university buildings. You've got the palace. So this is what it would become by 1906. Project more or less completed. Now in 1950s, we decided that we had to build what was called Yedilagam. You'll see it in this particular clip from Irukodugal. And Yedilagam was built to block off the northeastern face of Chepauk Palace. So you can't see Chepauk Palace from the northeastern side. But the western face is still open. So the Department of Agriculture built a single-storied building there. Then Mr. Muthaya, good man, wrote a letter protesting, so they added 2 more floors. And so you couldn't see Chepauk Palace from anywhere after that, except if you went behind onto Walaja Road and took a peek into the compound wall, then you would be able to see Chepauk Palace. Now, in 2005 or something like that, I was told by Mr. Muthaya, whenever he thought I was not doing any work, he'd tell me, why don't you go and find out something about this building? So I'd go. And so I went off to Chepauk Palace one day early in the morning, every door and window open. And why was it open? Half the windows were not there. And the doors were wide open. You could go and steal any government file you wanted, nobody would know. And you go inside Humayun Mahal, there was a crater on the first floor. The floor had caved in. And around it were desks. People were still working in this angle. So, they were not bothered that the building had begun to cave in. They were working there, wires everywhere. Outside in the portico, there was a family of squatters. They were cooking. And that man told me, Ayya, the building is konja nalla paathu solunga. So he thought that I have come from some PWD or something. So I wrote that this is a building that is waiting for a conflagration to happen sometime or the other. As though it was on cue, Humayun Mahal caught fire. And when it caught fire, the first thing that minister, I forget his name, he came, he didn't even look at the building. He just made an announcement. It will be demolished and a Kalyana Mandapam will be built in its place. It's there in the papers. You can see it, 2010 or so. Rangaswamy or something, I don't remember who the minister was. But he made an announcement that just came, made an announcement, left. Now the Nawab, good old Muhammad Ali, Abdul Ali, he wrote a letter to the chief minister and said that this was where my ancestors lived. Do you need my help to now restore it? I'm quite willing to do it. That is when everybody woke up and they said that Humayun Mahal will be restored. So work then started on the restoration of Humayun Mahal. Now Khalis Mahal felt very jealous because, Humayun Mahal is getting all the attention, what about me? So Khalis Mahal caught fire next. And this time there was no talk about demolition and they agreed that they would restore it. So now both the palaces are undergoing their restoration. So last few slides, I told you about the old pitch, which was in a east-west alignment. This was the clubhouse at that time. There is only one photograph of it that survives, which is in the club's Golden Jubilee souvenir, 1896. And this was built by Chisholm. And after this was demolished when the new alignment came about, the second pavilion, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, Henry Irwin, the man who designed the High Court of Madras and other such buildings, he designed this particular pavilion. And that is how we have the history of Chepauk. With that, I come to the end of my presentation. So poor Nawab got diddled out of the property, but we have managed to live on over here, and long may we continue to live. The buildings themselves, it's a pity that Chepauk Palace today is not visible. And you can but the restoration, to end on a very positive note, is a very serious restoration. They have done a very nice job of it. They are talking about now converting it into a museum. I don't have agreement with that, because I believe that you can have only 3 museums or 4 museums in a city. Beyond that, it is better to repurpose the building and keep it as an office place, because every day somebody will be sweeping it, somebody will be going through it, somebody will be seeing what is going wrong with it. It's only when you abandon or when you have a building where nobody goes that it finally goes to seed. Humayun Mahal and Chepauk Palace, and Khalas Mahal are now undergoing restoration. But even now, if you want to see them, you have to go behind and then go through and see it. The tower has been restored and it looks magnificent now. And when you are watching a game from here, when you feel you're a little tired, look in that direction and you'll catch a glimpse of Chepauk Palace from here. Thank you very much.